The Mercedes-Benz C63 SE Performance. This is one of the most controversial cars we've reviewed in recent memory. There's a reason for that. Gone is the V8 from AMG, and in its place is a turbocharged four-cylinder with two electric motors. For many people, this car has lost its heart and soul, that V8 muscle car feel. However, what we're going to try to do in this video is explain why Mercedes did it, the technology behind it, and leave whether or not you like this thing up to yourself. There are definite pros and cons to this car. Now, let's talk about the exterior and interior briefly before we head in the shop. Exterior styling, to me at least, this is a huge pro. It is a very classically designed C63 look. It has that butch muscle car look without being overstyled like the G Series M3 and M4. I think this is a much better looking car than that, and it's nowhere as nondescript as the Audi RS5 or CT4V Blackwing. From an interior perspective, mixed bag. Material choice is great, particularly for this class of car. Great use of carbon fiber and aluminum. The leather feels quite nice. The dash is nice and low. You have great visibility, and the touch points for this car feel fairly good. That said, the usability of this interior is mixed. You have the giant iPad with MBUX, which is the infotainment that Mercedes is using for this generation, which is entirely touch or haptic related. Basically, to do anything, you have to tip-tap on the display, which is rather distracting and not always the most intuitive. Steering wheel controls are also all haptic, which, again, mixed bag. The way you interact with the drive modes are these two dials or the head unit itself. And you have to interact with the drive modes because they control the power output of the electric motor and the overall feel of this car. The E modes and driving modes and the electrification of this car never falls away into the background. You are forced to interact with it while you're driving, which, depending on your technical proficiency or your tolerance for this stuff, mixed bag. Seats in this car are very comfortable. Unlike the M3 and M4, Mercedes hasn't really designed this for lots of track use. The reality is not many people track the C63. While this is track capable, the interior space is definitely more geared towards the comfort levels you were expecting out of an Autobahn cruiser. So the seats are heated and cooled, soft, endlessly adjustable. Back seats, fairly large for the size of the vehicle. You can fit back there as a full-size adult, and they do fold flat. And that is entirely necessary due to the fact that the trunk is highly compromised. And that's due to the fact that you have a battery pack over the rear axles. That battery pack is just over 6 kilowatt hours and weighs just under 200 pounds, but it eats into the trunk space. The trunk is no longer flat, there's a hump in it, and it's very, very compromised. Interior comfort levels past the dough, low noise floor, very quiet car, Burmester audio system right in line with the BMW Harman Kardon setup, and the headroom is pretty good. If you are about 6 foot tall, you should have no problems till you put on a helmet. Then the sunroof is going to be an issue. Not a problem in the M3 and M4, but again, this is not a track car. Lastly, pricing. The C63 starts at just over $80,000. It's like 84-ish, which is right in line with the xDrive M3, M4. And once you fully load this thing, it's just over 100, which again, right in line with the BMW M3 and M4. This is not an inexpensive car, but it's not outrageously priced given its competition. So with that, let's head in the shop and put this thing up on the lift. In the shop with the Mercedes-Benz C63 SE Performance. As we've already talked about, this is an incredibly controversial car, so I'm going to do my best to explain to you what Mercedes was trying to accomplish from a technical perspective. So let's start with chassis first. This is on the MRA2 platform or architecture. It's been around for a little while at this point. It's highly modular, highly scalable, and it underpins quite a few other Mercedes-Benz products. It's a rear drive based architecture. In the case of the C63, when compared to the regular C-Class, like C300, the car has a wider track. It's over 3 inches wider. It has a longer nose. It has a slightly modified wheelbase, so it's a little bit longer. The overall length of the car has grown. The car is also not a lightweight. You can blame the battery pack and some of the other decisions they made, which we're going to talk about in the drivetrain section, but it's just under 5,000 pounds. The car, however, due to the battery pack in the rear, is technically a little rear biased in weight balance, which helps with the overall driving dynamics of this car. They are attempting to use the electromechanical systems and the available grip in this car to essentially defeat physics. This is a double wishbone architecture as well, or multi-link front and rear, something that is unique to this car versus something like the G Series BMW. Just like the BMW, as you can see underneath, everything is aluminum. Everything's covered up, and this genuinely looks like a very high-end architecture or platform. When it comes to the electromechanical subsystems, something that is unique in this class of vehicle and dramatically helps with the nimbleness of this car is the fact that it has rear steer. What they're doing with rear steer is they're combining it with their VGRS or variable gear ratio steering rack to give this car an increased sense of nimbleness. So the resistance of the rack changes based upon what drive mode you're in, but the speed of what the rear steer motors are doing in the back, or rear steer motor in the back, with turn-in, getting the car to come in as quickly as possible, speeds up or changes its character based on the aggressiveness of drive mode. They combine that rear steer with its all-wheel drive system. Of course, it's rear biased. Yes, you can do the party trick of Mercedes, which activate drift modes and all the power to this rear-based architecture. Not to get too much in the drivetrain, but in the rear axle, you have an electric motor with a gearbox. It is fed directly into the rear differential, along with the power coming from the internal combustion engine. Depending on traction control setting and drive mode, you can essentially torque vector in the back to get this in and out of corners. The dynamic drive modes of this car as well, or the stability control settings, also change the character of the vehicle. So as you work your way up through the comically named drive modes, all the way from noob mode to pro to master mode, the car feels a little bit more loose, a little bit more nimble. Now, when it comes to suspension, it is not air ride, but it does have adaptive dampers. Next, braking. It's 6-piston front, 1-piston rear. While that sounds interesting, it's very common in this class of car. The G Series M3s do the same thing. You also get optional carbon ceramic brakes. What is unique about this car when it comes to braking is its regenerative function. Again, this is a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So there are four different modes of regen. You can independently control them based upon what drive mode you're in. And essentially, it's blending friction braking with the regen of the motors, or motor and electrical system, to give you regen in the battery system, along with actually helping you slow down the car and give you some increased balance. The track-based modes put this in a low state of regen, trying to make this feel as organic as possible. We'll talk about how they succeeded or failed at that when we get into the drive segment. All right, let's talk about the most controversial bit of this car, the electrified drivetrain. This car is now a plug-in hybrid. Gone is the twin-turbo V8, and in its place is the most powerful series production 4-cylinder ever. This 4-popper is a 2-liter single turbocharged engine. It makes 469 horsepower here in the US and 402 foot-pounds of torque. It has an electric turbocharger. Basically, you have this Garrett turbocharger, a single one that is the size of my head here in the engine bay. It is massive. The catalyst is right behind it. And to help it spool up almost instantaneously is an electric motor that sits between the turbine and the compressor wheel. Essentially, it's in the center of it on the shaft, and it makes up to 6 kilowatts. That's not really the point of it. What it allows it to do is spool up this turbo almost instantaneously. The electric motor can spin up to like 175,000 RPM. It can spin faster than the total speed of the actual turbine compressor, or the actual turbine in the turbocharger, which only spools up to like 160-ish thousand RPM. What it's doing with that excess energy is sending that power back to the battery pack, which lives over the rear axle, and that is the next part of this. So in this drivetrain, you have 2 electric motors, one in the turbo, one in the rear axle. You have one giant battery in the back, or giant, it's 6.2 kilowatt hours total. Actually usable is much smaller. It essentially acts as a supercapacitor, quickly charging and discharging, and you have 2 gearboxes. You have the 9-speed dual clutch, wet dual clutch, which deals with the actual internal combustion engine. Then you have a 2-speed gearbox in the electric motor in the back of this car. It is an incredibly complicated setup. So God help you if you own this thing outside of warranty, and if you're one of the Mercedes techs that has to service this thing, my hat's off to you. I do not envy you in the least. They are doing everything they can to keep this drivetrain exceptionally cool, and they've done a good job. This 4-popper has enormous intercooler, oil cooler, radiators. It's a closed block. It is a handmade engine. This particular 2-liter was made by Max Berger, so congrats to him for making this thing. And the battery pack. So typically in electrified vehicles, what gets really hot is the batteries. So they've taken the F1 technology they've pioneered, Mercedes has, and they've taken the cooling strategy for the pack. So it's a lithium-ion pack. They are cylindrical cells that are basically laid out flat, and they sit in 3.7 gallons of coolant. They are completely submerged in coolant to keep themselves as cool as possible. The operating temp is sub 120 Fahrenheit. What they are doing with that is they have like 550-ish or 60-ish individual cells, and they're feeding the electric motor in the rear. The electric motor is constantly always supplying at least 90-ish horsepower of electricity. When you ask for it, when you are in race mode and you ask for full boost, for 10 seconds, it will supply 201 horsepower, giving the total system output of the C63 SE Performance in the US 669 horsepower and 751 foot-pounds of torque. It is good for 0 to 60 in just under 3 seconds, according to Car and Driver, just over 11 seconds in the quarter mile. And this is, again, scooting 4,800 pounds-ish wet in total weight. The gearbox in the back of this car, in the electric motor, exists purely to maximize efficiency of the single electric motor in the back. Sub 87-ish miles an hour, you're in the first gear. When you get past that, it goes into second gear, thus maximizing the efficiency of the electric motor in the rear. The reason they went to the four-popper in this car does not have to do with required emissions from the government. That is a controversial bit of this. It was a deliberate decision by the Mercedes engineers at AMG to show what is possible for them in a car like this. In their words, the V8 does not make the C63. It is a performance available to the driver. So with that said, and I promise in the future we're going to go in a deeper dive, let's take this for a street drive and then let's head to Autobahn Country Club.
Jack, I know people are tired of hearing you talk about a four-cylinder in the shop for about 2 hours. Let's get to the driving, shall we?
All right.
Dude, this thing is fucking nuts. I can't believe how fast this car is.
Yes.
Like to 100 plus, it's mind-boggling how quick it is.
On a highway pole heading out to Autobahn, this thing kept up with the Z06, which is, I mean, you know, you're talking about a car that weighs 1,000 pounds less than this, and this is a very, very fast car up to 100 miles an hour. I mean, you drove this back from when we shot with Car Care out on the highway. What are your sort of takeaways? Ignoring the V8 part, you never drove the V8 variants like I did. How does this feel as a modern sports sedan?
I think what really surprises me, because I'm coming from a place where I could give two shits about the V8 or not V8 or any drivetrain in this car, I'm looking at it as like the luxury car, sporty thing that's got to do dual purpose, right? Because this is the point of a street drive. We're talking about how it performs.
And to be fair, no one's ever going to track this car. No one tracked the last one.
Right.
This is just, I'm rich, I want a fast car.
I think what's special about it is you can see how much potential is in the electrification or hybridization of the internal combustion engine. Because when you're really ripping this thing, namely from a start, and you get this thing going, it has almost EV levels of torque feel to it. It pulls like you're driving an EV, and then you still have the internal combustion sound, which, you know, you're going to argue it's a four-cylinder, right? Now imagine this system with a properly set up 6 or 8 cylinder. I mean, it's basically giving the internal combustion engine the life, the next generation life that it needs, and it is really, really special. I mean, I know objectively, right, is the transmission perfect? No, but I would argue it's got some character. It's real. It's a real gearbox. You know, it's not trying to fake shifts. It's just a little bit abrupt enough to make you feel like you're doing something. You can still hit fuel cutoff, like all the good things that you want. The ride quality, you know, it's still, for a sporty sedan, is still within the realm of acceptability. It's not the softest riding car.
No, there's a lot of rebound in the soft mode. So, you know, a little later we'll put it in a comfort mode after we get through these corners. You get the big C's little ship effect, but at high speeds, like, you know, Autobahn speeds, this thing's perfect. How does it feel at street levels of grip?
I think what it does well is it's got a lot of body flow. You know, there's a lot of body motion in this car, and it does feel heavy. I mean, you can't get away from its weight and its size. But I think because of the way that they've done the suspension here, it does a great job, even in its highest sport mode, of giving you some directness while you feel like you're still driving the car because there's body motion. It's not completely synthetic. And then the way they have the rear steer set up as well, it makes it far more nimble than it really should be.
Yes.
You know, again, these electromechanical systems make up for the fact that it's heavy, it's big, and it feels smaller because of it. Steering is, you know, ridiculously fast, and because of the rear steer, it feels even faster. I guess as an overall package, I think it's very entertaining. It definitely does not have the character sound of a V8 or like a 6-cylinder. You know, it doesn't have that, but it makes up for it in the fact that it is
ballistically fast.
It's so overkill. I mean, we said this about the M3, right?
Yes.
Like, dude, what are you gonna do with this shit? I feel bad just driving this on the street because it's a missile. I'd be curious to see your opinion when you drive this on the track, though.
I think as a street car, this has a lot of the deficiencies the modern generation G Series BMW has, right?
Yeah.
In an X-Drive car, the steering's too fast, right? It's not that natural. The brake pedal's disconnected.
Yeah.
The new M3s don't ride that well. They have the same problem this car has, that because they're trying to take in this case, 5,000-pound car, in that case, a 4,000-pound car, and mask its weight, the spring rates are really, really, well, the car is extremely stiff, and at lower speeds, big bumps, it suffers for it, and that car doesn't sound good either, right? It has all of the same deficiencies that the G Series M3 has, but just like that car, it is blindingly fast.
Yeah.
I guess it's what you prioritize. I do think, I understand why people are so down on this car, right? From a big picture perspective. You buy these cars not because it's fast. You want to be connected to the drivetrain in some sense. And I know why people don't like the high output 4-cylinder, but if you can strip the emotion part away, which you should never do, but if you strip the emotion part away and you just think about this as an objectively, you know, how this car drives objectively, other than its low speed comfort ride over bumps, it's really impressive. And if you put it in comfort mode, it's basically a luxury car.
I mean, that's the thing about it, right? I think, you know, you're doing a technology play on this to see just how you can transform a car to have multiple cars in one. And I know this is like, you beat this to a dead horse with all these brands. They're like, well, you can have the character of a luxury car and then the soul of a sports car. And I think this is really starting to stretch what's possible with this technology. You know, when you put it in comfort, it's automatically doing everything for you. It's in the softest setting. It's recuperating its electricity for you without you having to mess around with
the engine's off currently at 34 miles an hour.
Exactly. So it's doing the hybrid stuff, and you're getting over 20 miles per gallon if you're driving it normally. I think, you know, it's trying to balance all that. And then when you go into Sport Plus or the race settings, it really does feel like a sports sedan. I think where they're hitting a wall, and a lot of brands are going to hit a wall with this, is the weight. The weight is gotten to be, they've overrun that new nimble feeling car by the weights continue to go up, and you're having to band-aid that with all this other tech. And I think that's where we're going to start to see a peak of what you can do here, and they're going to have to start to figure out how to make this shit lighter. You know, it doesn't mean this is bad, but I'll be curious to see this tech.
Would you take this, the RS5 we just drove, or the G Series M3, M4?
Did we drive an RS5?
Yeah, we just did the one with the fixed dampers. That's how forgettable it is to you?
No, honestly, yeah, it's that forgettable. I mean, right, there's nothing wrong with it, but I mean, I just...
or the M3?
That's a really, really hard choice. I would have to say, because this is first-gen tech in here,
yeah,
I would just take a BMW because they have all that shit sorted out. I mean, you know you're going to get your money's worth out of it. You're going to be able to flip that car. I feel like you lease this car to experience it and give it away. There's no fixing it. There's no, like, resale value of it, you know.
But you don't want to buy one five years old without a warranty?
I mean, you know what you're getting here. You want to get out of it, where that BMW has a little bit more staying power in terms of, like, yeah, I'd keep it in my garage. But it is really cool, and I think I'll be curious to see how they scale this out.
All right, Mark. I'm gonna head to Autobahn Country Club without you because you're too busy flying.
Yeah, I want to drive minivans.
Yeah, of course. All right. So with that, Mark, let's head to Autobahn Country Club. C63 SE Performance at Autobahn Country Club South. All right, Max Berger, let's see what we can do with the most powerful production car 4-cylinder ever, which, you know, is a bit controversial in a car, a little controversial in a car like this. Wet track or damp track makes this a little bit interesting. All right, let's talk about drivetrain. When you fully unbridle this car, as we're about to, probably not surprisingly, I'm gonna say it's rather brisk. The gearbox, this dual clutch, or gearboxes, plural, do a pretty good job out here. There's no denied shifts. Pretty fast. It's pretty fast. Lots and lots of power. About to demonstrate again on this next big straight. No perceivable lag, at least in my experience, leaving corners. Downshifts when you want it to. Good maintenance throttle. Definitely feels very rear biased. We are in race mode with stability and traction control off. Right, past the kick down, max power. 130. This is a very, very quick car, which then leads me into the brake feel of this vehicle. The regen in this mode, in race, is doing its best to feel fairly organic. It feels like basically every brake-by-wire hybrid performance car I've experienced, which means the feel is a bit strange. You're immediately in friction braking, then you feel a little bit of a regen effect. It does a good job stopping this car again, you know. Acknowledge the fact that this is still a 5,000-pound luxury sedan. The number of people that are actually going to be doing this in their performance car is probably zero. It's a very, very competent drivetrain that makes a bucket load of power. The chassis balance of this car, at least for now, because we haven't run off the tires yet, is fairly neutral. You have some slight mid-corner understeer that then follows to basically a rear balanced or biased car as I drive around this Miata. What? It's definitely free, is my initial impression of this car. This car does trail brake, but again, the weird, to me at least, weird feeling pedal changes some of the confidence you have in this car. Look, let's be honest, this is a car that you're never going to be doing this stuff in. This is a street car primarily. Well, my insurance, I'm sure, is going to appreciate the fact that I'm not in a position to try to get this thing into drift mode as I fiddle fuck with all the various drive modes to get this thing to disconnect the rear axle. More as I've not figured out the complete balance to drift this car. So with that, let's head into the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the Mercedes-Benz C63 SE Performance. First off, huge thanks to our Mercedes-Benz rep, Andrew, who did his best to provide us some level of technical support for this loan, and of course, Autobahn Country Club, who continues to give us a home to shoot videos like this. So what about the car? Well, it's sort of a mixed bag. You can't really defeat physics. It's a car that once you run the tires off, you're gonna deal with traction issues both in the front and in the rear. It is a car that is fairly nimble though. And despite some of its body lean, it's a fairly easy car to get on with. Braking, this does not have the carbon ceramic package, so I did not push it that hard, but the regen isn't necessarily the most organic. So what does that mean all in all? Well, it means that this is a modern car and that it suffers from a lot of the deficiencies that a lot of, or most, modern high-performance sports sedans do. Most cars are brake-by-wire. Most cars don't sound all that good. And There are a lot of electromechanical systems in modern cars that strip some of the driving feel out of them, and in their place are blinding speed. So with that, if you can live with those compromises and you can live with the fact that it doesn't sound like a V8 anymore, this is a great car. Though I do think in the modern era, what most enthusiasts are looking for isn't necessarily blinding speed, but a connected driving experience that leaves you smiling. So with that, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon.